So you're out with the lads, you're having it large down Bankside, off to the London Bridge Nando's for a cheeky mango and lime butterfly, maybe sneak a Fanta, lads, with our Gaz, who's an absolute ledge, the Archbishop of Banterbury. You don't expect to see this looming over you. These are the remains of Winchester Palace, which was the London residence of the Bishop of Winchester from the 12th century to the 1640s. 80 years ago, all you'd see if you walked down these streets was warehouses. And then in 1944, a group of people went into a warehouse on the north side of the street. They climbed up rickety stairs and crossed over a bridge that took them over a room to this side. Then they climbed up ladders to finally reach a weird bit of wall where there was a circle of slightly thicker bricks. One of them had brought tools and they tore out the brick infill, revealing this rose window for the first time in over 100 years. It was built in the 12th century by a chap called Henry of Blois, who was not only the Bishop of Winchester, but also the brother of the King, Stephen. He managed to get it for the princely sum of £8 a year. It's hard to imagine the size of the place from these ruins, but it really was a palace. It had gardens and fountains and a park and a tennis court and a bowling alley and its own fish pond for growing the fish that the bishop and his servants ate. It even had its own riverside entrance, so you could sail into it by boat. Most of what we see is 14th century. This would have been the Great Hall, where the bishop and his guests and servants ate. It would have had a wooden roof. There'd be a high table for the bishop and his family and important guests, and then long tables down the rest of the hall. A bit like Hogwarts. You'd sit in order of precedence, so the head servants sit nearest the high table, then the steward and the almoner, the keeper of the wardrobe, all the way down to cooks, messengers and boys at the bottom. The bishop is served first. He takes what he wants from the trencher, and then it's passed down the table. There might be as much as 8 courses, depending on what you count as a course. And underneath, there'd be a wine cellar. Only the most important officers were allowed wine, the rest have ale. The very last time Thomas Becket came to London, he stayed here. The locals gave him a warm welcome, but the king's son ordered him to leave at once. He obeyed and went to Canterbury, and it's there that he was murdered. In 1424, the Scottish king James I had his wedding feast here. He gets married to a lady called Joan Beaufort, who's English. Their story is a real love story. James had been captured by pirates as a child and handed over to the English king Henry IV and imprisoned. While he was there, the old king of Scotland died, so he's the king now, but he was still in prison. Apparently he didn't waste his time, though. He read a lot, he played music and wrote poetry, and he saw Joan for the first time while he was imprisoned at Windsor Castle, and he fell in love with her. He wrote a poem for her called The Kingis Quair, or The King's Book. He was in prison for 18 years. Meanwhile, Scotland had descended into anarchy without its king, so eventually the English king decided he could go home if he paid 60,000 marks for his bed and board and married Joan. They got married at Southwark Cathedral. They had 8 children and sent them all over Europe to form political marriages. Although the Bishop of Winchester was pretty rich and powerful, he was just one bishop who wasn't in London all the time. So policing and town planning was a lot more lax on his land than in the city. It ended up being a haven for all sorts of industries that the city didn't want. Tanneries, hospitals for the poor, and brothels. In 1506, there were 18 recorded stews on Bankside. The bishop didn't see any contradiction in owning brothels, and indeed some bishops visited them. The women who worked in them are sometimes euphemistically referred to as Winchester geese, after the Bishop of Winchester. By the 16th century, though, it was getting pretty run down. In 1603, it was used as basically a detention centre for 800 masterless vagabonds who were being deported to the Low Countries as a measure against the plague. During the English Civil War, Parliament turned it into a prison for supporters of the king. It was sold off in chunks to create warehouses and flats. Londoners have always been turning things into flats. and it got totally built over, to the point where you couldn't see it anymore. Finally, during the redevelopment of this street in the 1980s, it was restored to its current state, and these days it's looked after by English Heritage.